What do you get when you combine a serial entrepreneur, a tech pioneer, a leadership coach, and a podcaster? You get today's guest, Jeff Sesol. And today's conversation is packed with perspective you won't hear anywhere else. In this episode of the Podcast Interview Marketing Show, Jeff and I dive deep in what it means to lead, to grow, and to stay human in the midst of one of the most transformational times in history. From his launching the company FreeDrive in the 90s and pioneering how we store and share data online, to building a leadership coaching brand, and then a podcasting platform that brings teams and companies together to thrive, Jeff brings clarity to the chaos. We talk about the power of AI. Yes, but more importantly, we talk about how to stay in control when the world is moving faster and faster. Jeff shares how he's using AI to deepen relationships, improve performance, and free up his time, but not to replace human thinking. And he shares a powerful metaphor from his own skydiving experience. Sometimes when the pressure is high and the future feels foggy, what we really need to do is pull the parachute, pull the chute, catch your breath, and reorient. Now, let's dive into this one. You're going to love it. Well, Jeff, you come here with such an amazing background, right? From a leadership coach, from an early business owner, an entrepreneur in the internet, podcast host, podcast guest. And I'm so excited to talk with you here we are, August of 2025 on what's going on in the world and how people can apply that to growing their brand, growing their business, and specifically around podcast interviews. So could you give us sort of a snapshot of how you see the world today? And I know that's a big question to start off with, but then we can dive down into it. It's like, what are you most excited about in the world today?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. And to answer your question, I don't think there's one answer, but probably multiple. But I think for me, the ability to give myself more time due to AI to do other things. So it used to take me hours upon hours upon hours to figure things out, to analyze things, to do things. Now, as a leadership coach, when I work with my people, I take my own notes. So I don't let an assistant record the entire thing for me. I take what I feel are important notes. But then what I do is every 3 months, I run it through my AI assistant, which is Emily. I named her. And she learns, and I ask her to give me analysis of the notes. And she gives me things that we've talked about and things that we need to work on and things that we should be thinking about. And I'm just blown away by it because I just like, it would take me hours and she does it in minutes to do this. So, in the world right now, I mean, obviously AI is the big thing. Everyone's excited about it. There's a lot going on in that environment. But I think the scary side of that is that we're moving so fast that I also don't want to lose that ability of human interaction, human touch, human thinking overall, right? We need to kind of remember we have to think for ourselves. And so one of the struggles is that a lot of the students now in school are just using AI to write their papers, right? And so they're not doing it for themselves. They're letting AI do it for them, and they're not really learning. And so that scares me for our future as a society, as a whole. But the exciting part is what AI can do for us. And again, I just touched the surface when I'm using it for analysis, but it can do so many things that I think it's just, the dawn of a new day. Each day we wake up, everything is changing, and we can go as Star Trek used to say, go where no man has ever gone before, right? And so it's going to be fun to see where it goes.
Well, and I think back when you had 30 years ago. You had the company FreeDrive, and I was doing the research. You went from 0 to 20 million subscribers on that. Were you feeling the same thing 30 years ago that, what does this make possible? And then also the flip side, what does this make possible?
Yeah, great question. And I got to tell you, so it took us 18 months to get our first million. Then it only took 13 weeks to get the next million, 11 weeks to get the next million, 10 weeks to get the next million. I mean, it was insane. But we were doing things that didn't exist. We were building technology that didn't exist. And so to have to keep up with that sort of pace was absolutely insanity for us. We had to come up with new ways to think about something as simple as load balancing servers. Today, no one has to worry about that. Back then, if our servers got to 70%, but let's say one was at 70% and one was at 20%, how do you balance it so they're both at like 45, right? And so we would talk to other companies and we would try and find load balancing software. And, we finally found some that worked. And then we even broke that because of the volume at which we were doing things at. And then even the speed at which things were happening. We had an Oracle database that was doing 1,500 transactions a second. And Oracle said, that's impossible. And we had an Oracle guy come in and do it. And he goes, okay, I will never admit that this is what you guys have going because I don't know how you did it, but it's doing it. But we were doing things that we were like, breaking the mold in a sense, right? Just trying to create things that didn't exist and just really ramping things up in a way where we changed the world for the way that people stored their files and got to their files. It became so easy to say, hey, from work to home, I'm going to throw them up on my FreeDrive. And then when I get home, I pull it down, I work on it, send it back up. And when I get back to work, I pull them back down. That changed the way that everyone thought about things and how they did things and all kinds of different aspects of that. The struggles, though, I think, was the oh-no's, was because we were growing so fast, there were so many things. I mentioned that load balancing is one thing, but the other piece that we ran into that was really difficult at first, and again, we had to create something to do this, was if our servers got to about 70% usability, we had to add more servers. Well, it took better part of 3 or 4 days to format a server, get it online, get it into the array and all that stuff. We finally figured out a way. We created a Ghost CD that would actually just replicate the entire operating system, and we would just give it a different name. And by the way, we were big into music back then, so our servers' names were like Earth, Wind, and Fire, or what was it, the Jacksons, or the Eagles, or we just had fun with that, right? And the funny part about Earth, Wind, and Fire is because those were our first three, and Earth lasted the longest. So I guess that's a good thing. But that was the thing. So we had to, we could actually put 7 servers online within about 3 hours by the end. But it took effort to figure that out. It took months to figure out how to do the best way to do that. So
we've mentioned this before. It's like when you start talking about, well, these are unprecedented times. I think a lot of times what that means is that we're young. We don't remember the last thing, right? COVID was unprecedented unless you had lived through the Spanish flu and the Black Plague, which nobody was still alive, right? But thinking about what the changes and the struggles that you went through 30 years ago with the internet, the people are still doing the same thing today. Maybe the pace is different. Maybe the logic behind it is different, but there's always been the challenges there.
Well, it's funny. When we first started to move to the internet, so when we started the company before FreeDrive, it was called FuturesNet. It was a network for the futures and options industry. And we had London Financial Futures, New York Mercantile Exchange, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, Smith Barney, and a bunch of other boutique firms all online. And it was a 4-disc, if people remember the little discs, it was a 4-disc install set, right? Well, one of the struggles with that was every time we made a change, we had to send out a whole new set of discs to everybody. And then we had to help them install them and get them all set up. Where when we moved to the internet, once we made a change, it was instantaneous. The concern was we didn't know enough about the internet, and we were concerned what's going to happen, right? Should we move to the internet? What about security? What about all these different things? So I met with a gentleman in New York City. I flew out there, and he was big into the internet. He had been around it for quite a few years already. Because again, we all should realize the internet that we know didn't start until about 96 or so, 95. The internet before that was created for scientists. It was called CERN, and they passed information around the same way we do, except they used IP addresses that instead of names and things of that nature. But the interesting part was I said to him, look, we're concerned about security and moving things to the internet. What is your thoughts? And he goes, look, Jeff, there is more brain power being used in the world today for the internet, that things are going to be solved at a pace that we can't even comprehend. He said, for example, we're all worried about using credit cards online. Now, this is back in 96. He said, the problem's already been solved. We just haven't rolled it out yet. He said, every time a problem comes up, the massive amount of brain power throughout the world, not just the United States, throughout the world, is helping to solve these issues at lightning speed. And so that's one of the things we have to keep in mind. And when he said that to me, I was just like, oh my gosh, you're so right. I mean, it's not just like a bunch of guys sitting in a room. This is the world and people thinking outside the box of things that can happen, which is how AI became about, right? And how, that all kind of came about with this ability to, Sam Altman really encouraged his people to think outside the box. Don't let the box stop you. I always tell people, I like to draw outside the box. I always tell people there is no box. The sky's the limit. Whatever you want to do, you can do, especially in these times. And I think that's an important factor to remember. So, we need to realize that the amount of not just AI computer power, but the amount of worldly brain power that's going into this is incredible.
And as you said that, I was thinking of that question that you had about security 30 years ago. People are having the same thing now of, well, can I put it up into AI? Will it be secure? And like you said, all these people are working on it. There's a great movie out there about the history of BlackBerry. And not the fruit, but the early smartphone. And it was interesting to watch that. And, at one point, the CEO comes and says, to save this company, we've got to sell whatever it was, 1 million units in the next month. And engineering looks at him and said, that will crash our systems. And he's like, don't worry. By the time they're delivered by the end of the month, you'll have figured that out. And it's like entrepreneurship is jumping out of the plane and figuring, I can make the parachute on the way down.
Well, it's funny you were bringing some of this stuff up. I was just watching The Men That Made America, right? And Carnegie was tasked to build a bridge across the Mississippi River down in St. Louis. And he talked to one of his engineers and he said, it's impossible to do it. He looked at him and he goes, nothing's impossible. We just got to think about it differently. And then he started building it with steel. And that's what changed the world.
Taking that, going to today, how are you trying to think about things differently? And once again, I love your perspective of you're the entrepreneur, you're the tech entrepreneur, and then also the leadership side of that. And as you go into this, next phase, how should people be thinking about things?
Here's my biggest concern, and this is why I'm going to lead into how they should be thinking about things. My biggest concern is that we as people are lazy, and we're going to allow AI to dictate how we do things. And we're going to ask all kinds of questions, and we're using it to the nth degree right now to do all things because it's new, right? It's exciting. So, hey, can AI do this? And can AI do that? Right? If we are not careful, we are going to lose who we are as human beings and the ability to make human decisions. And that's what scares me, is that we allow AI to help us make those decisions. We still need to remember that it's still human interaction, human decisions, things of that nature that really drives who we are as people, who we are as companies, who we are as a nation, and who we are as a world. And if we're not careful with that, it's going to, this alpha generation that's coming up is going to eventually not know how to think for themselves. And that part scares me because every time we've made so many changes, the Industrial Revolution I was just talking about, The Men That Made America, it's about Carnegie and about Rockefeller and Ford and Vanderbilt. And those guys all, made their fortunes because they thought outside the box. And my concern is that we're going to lose that ability to do that.
I heard Vern Harnish recently talking about the future is A players using AI. And I thought it was an interesting take on it that we've all got the same tools, right? And to this day, there's some people using computers to play solitaire, right? It's a lazy thing to do. It's a C-level activity, but there's the same people could use that same computer that are curious and want to get more out of it, that can design, the next great company, the next great brand.
Right. Absolutely. And I think the cool part about AI is it can give you the shortcuts, if there are any, but to success, that is, right? Because there's some things that we're limited. I used to always tell people, I surround myself with people that are smarter than me because I don't have all the answers. I knew that, right? So if I bring other people in, then they're going to have different opinions, different thoughts, different ideas, different solutions, different questions that help drive different things. And with AI, it kind of shortcuts a few of those things where we can ask, if we ask the right question, we potentially could get an answer and go, oh, never thought of that. That's awesome.
So let's pivot a little bit. You're a podcast host too, right? In this age of AI, why do you think that podcasts are important to you or to anyone else?
Several reasons. One is I can help people that are struggling with certain issues in their business by bringing up podcasts that we've brought about on that subject. In other words, I had my AI assistant, Emily, go through and categorize all of my podcasts. She put them into certain categories, certain titles, who the guest was, synopsis of what the podcast was about. So now someone says, hey, I'm struggling here. And I can give them probably 4 or 5 podcasts and say, hey, go check these out. This might help you. Right. And that's one of the reasons that we do it. Our whole goal for our podcast, I'm sure much like yours, is to really help the listeners and think about things in a different way. One of the struggles that most people have, especially if you're in a business, is when you're going through a problem, you think I'm the only one going through it. And the reality is so many people have gone through it. And so what you need to do is realize that you're not the only one going through it. Others have gone through it. It's okay to fail. It's okay to ask questions and ultimately maybe find the right answers so that you don't fail and you can keep pushing on.
Yeah. And it's interesting as you said that. I was like thinking, yeah, everybody thinks they're the first person to ever struggle through 4th grade math, right? And it's like, no, every year people do, right? And so that idea of introducing them to new ideas. And one of the things that strikes me is that even with the internet or with AI, sometimes you have to know the right questions to ask or the right words to use. And what I have found in podcasts, and, I love your podcast because at times people will talk about a challenge that I'd never even thought about or that I hadn't put words to it. And it's like, oh, I had that same thing, or thinking through it. And it's that, that exposure to it. And maybe I could go through AI, and I love how you call it Emily. I've got to come up with a name here and make sure my wife doesn't think that I've got a girlfriend there, right? But to go through there and dissect that, but sometimes hearing that real human conversation, you can learn from that too.
Absolutely, and I think that's the thing that I don't want to lose through AI is that human conversation, that human thought process. AI is amazing. I use it darn near every day for so many different things. I use it when I'm looking at a company to maybe start doing leadership development for, and I ask them to tell me everything about the company, everything about the CEO, everything about the COO. What does the internet say about, why would our services work best with them? I get a complete analysis in seconds, which is so amazing because, again, Emily has given me back hours in my day.
And it's interesting. There's no doubt now that AI is indexing the podcast interviews, right? Because you look at the referrals that we get, our number one referral source is AI. And people will say, I found you from ChatGPT. And there was that study from Cornell that just came out. Now, granted, it's based on e-commerce, but they said that the traffic from AI converted 9 times better than from traditional SEO. And, people talked with Emily for 6 minutes before they went to the e-commerce site. And, the idea of keywords, the first prompt was 29 words long, right? There's not keywords. It's like phrases and conversations and, ask them the good, the bad, the ugly about everything.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to the time when we all have Jarvises like Tony Stark did, where we could just have a conversation and he'd go out and find all the answers for us. So I love all that.
Yeah, maybe we'll just go old school and call it Jeeves, right? It's like ask Jeeves.
I remember that.
You've got to have some gray hair to understand that joke and how it didn't work out. So how do you see the future going with this? What should people be thinking about as far as, say, with the podcasting? You're a guest and a host. Where do you see the leverage on that? Why do you do both?
Guess just because I like to share my thoughts, ideas, and beliefs. So I started the podcast as a way, and let me even back up a bit. I started my company, Pull The Chute. Let's go back to there. Because I was doing consulting for years. When I left FreeDrive, I consulted for 20 years, darn near. And I kind of looked in the mirror, and actually COVID was probably the catapult for this. I looked in the mirror and said, all right, you're not going to retire anytime soon because I love to work. My dad taught me if you don't use your brain, you lose it. So I'm going to continue to do that. My dad retired at 59 and a half because he hated his job. He worked for the government, and then he worked for me for the next 20 years. Because he loved to just do stuff. And of course, the funny story is that I never had to pay him. He didn't want to get paid. And my sister wanted her to come visit him down in St. Louis one day. And he goes, oh no, I got to go to help Jeff work. And she goes, you realize he's not paying you. And he goes, yeah, I know, but it's what I want to do because it keeps my brain kind of moving. Right. And so there's that aspect of things. So during COVID, I kind of looked in the mirror and said, okay, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? What's your going to, emphasis be on things? And I kind of said, well, I love to help people grow and be the best they can be. Small businesses, large businesses, just people in general. And I said, okay, well, there's kind of your mission statement then. And then I said, okay, how are you going to do it? And I thought, well, I've been consulting for 18, almost 20 years at that point. And I said, if I consult, it's usually just one company at a time because it's hard to do multiples and focus on them. Because you're in the trenches with them. You're not coaching them, you're in the trenches. So that's why I kind of came up with coaching. And I thought, you know what, if I can coach multiple companies, then I can help more companies grow and be the best they can be because I can help the leaders grow and be the best they can be. There's a couple of interesting stats that are out there. One that says during the Great Resignation here of a couple of years ago, 4 million people a month were changing jobs. 79% of those people were changing jobs because they felt unappreciated. Only 12% left for more money, which tells you there is a huge gap in the leadership world. And it's not anybody's fault other than it's a generational thing, I believe. And that we never taught the younger Gen Xers and all the millennials how to be leaders. Millennials in particular, we have 4 generations: boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Zers. Millennials were the everyone gets a trophy generation. If you showed up, you got an award. That's not the real world. You got to earn your keep, right? You got to, do the job, and then maybe you get the raise or maybe you get the promotion. And so to be a leader that's going to help people to achieve that is something that we have to work on. So I started Pull The Chute, to be able to do that so that I could coach people to be, to have better businesses and to be better leaders within their business. Cause I always say, look, if you grow your people, you're going to grow your company. And real quick, if I could, the name Pull The Chute came from a skydiving event that I did where you go 5,500 feet or you go 14,000 feet up in the plane. You tumble out, you're falling at 120 miles an hour. It's hard to breathe. One little move in your hand, you're spinning out of control. Everything's happening so fast, you can't see where you're at and you can't see where you're going. But at 5,500 feet, you pull the chute. Suddenly you can breathe again, you're in control, see where you're at and see where you want to go. And as I tell people, isn't that a lot like being in business? And a lot of times, isn't that a lot like life? And sometimes we just need to pull the chute. We need to take a breath, feel in control, see where we're at and see where we want to go. And so I work with companies and owners of companies, people within companies to do that on a weekly basis. And I think that that's, for me, from the podcasting, to be able to do that, to get people to take 35 minutes and listen to our podcast and kind of learn something is one of the things that we really enjoy doing. And we wanted to do that so that people could understand that there are other ways to do things, that leadership really, the first thing I teach people, it's not about you. And that there's this thing called why and because, and that the Generation Z is going to want to know this. So the Gen Zers don't want to, if you just tell them to do something, I grew up in an era where it was like, keep your head down, do your job. You go home, you got a paycheck. I didn't ask you to think, or I don't pay you to think, was what I was told one time. Now, the Gen Zers and even some of the younger millennials, they don't, that's not what they're going to want. They want to know why they're having to do something. Well, here's the deal. If you can tell them why, how many times have we been in a meeting and someone goes, why am I doing this? This is so stupid. Versus if I can tell them exactly why you're doing it, because we're trying to get to this result, they're like, oh, okay, I can do that. And they're probably actually going to do a better job with it. But we got to learn as leaders to kind of share that information and to be a little more transparent, show a little more empathy, show a little more appreciation to our employees. And you're going to get so much more out of them.
As you said that, I was thinking there's so many corollaries there. It's like we were talking before about, AI and stuff like that. And it's not just telling it what to do. It's like asking it to think and not telling it every step, but this is what we're trying to do, right? This is the why. This is the vision, right? And that is, I'm a old Generation X, and I was not trained that. It was like, do it. That's how, what you're supposed to do. Like, I remember hearing people say, I'm not paying you to think. Well, then what are you paying them for? Right? Because if you're just paying them for their back, you can get a mule for cheaper than that. Right? So you better be paying them to think. And so today, even though now we've got this super smart assistant, they still got to be told the why and understand. They don't understand the context with that. And the other thing that really struck me in that is that I would love to see that study where people left to figure out if it was the high performers that left just because they didn't feel appreciated, or if it was the low performers. My guess on that is the people that are just showing up to get a paycheck and punch the clock. They don't care. They'll put up with it. It's the high performers, those people that you wanted to keep. Those are the people that are leaving.
Yeah. And what I don't get from companies and leaders and C-suite people is, look, the stats show that probably people use 55%. You get 55% of them for the day, meaning, out of 100%, they give you a 55% or maybe even 56% effort. Because it's just a job. There's no real care. But if you can make them feel important, feel like they're part of it. I always tell people, look, ask them what they need to do their job. As long as it's within reason, did it for them. Because guess what? Now they own it. And they're going to do it better than any other time they ever did it. Because you asked them what they needed. You got them what they needed. Now they're like, okay, I own this now. And that's going to go a long way where people feel like they're a part of things. Ask people their opinions on things. Don't just make arbitrary decisions. So, it's important to create this environment where people feel safe to talk. How many times have we been in a meeting, and the boss talks and no one says anything, and then you walk out and someone goes, well, I don't know, I probably would have done it this way or that way. And you go, well, why didn't you say something? Well, I didn't want to be the idiot in the room that said something. No one else was saying anything because they don't feel safe in that environment. Right. And so those are all important factors of a leadership that we have to, build into it. And you're going to find out that, by doing some of those small things, the people's efforts are going to go from 55, 56% up to like 75%. I mean, you're never going to get 100%, but boy, I'll tell you what, that's a huge jump. If you can get 20% more out of people, major.
And that discretionary effort, I remember hearing somebody gave the example of the traditional model is NASA. Top down, strategic planning, bureaucracy, right? And NASA can get a kilogram of freight up to the International Space Station for I think it's $55,000. SpaceX has figured out how to do it for $50, right? And it's just that bottom up extra effort from people and their creativity of how can we solve this next little problem.
Well, you mentioned NASA. I don't know if people know this, but the Space Shuttle Columbia, that when it blew up, the people below the management knew there was a problem, but they weren't able. They tried to tell them, but they wouldn't listen because there was no pipeline where they didn't feel comfortable saying, hey, we have a problem here. And so upper management didn't know that there was a problem that lower workers knew about because there was no communication, that ability to share their ideas and thoughts.
And it's amazing to think, as we were talking about, the internet, the explosion of the space shuttle there, we're talking now 40 years ago, right? Over that. And still we're learning these principles, and, history may not repeat itself, but we get things that come in cycles. And I think it's important sometimes to look back and say, what did we learn last time here? What are we learning now? And as crazy as the times of the internet was, like that was jumping out of the plane, hitting terminal velocity. How do you breathe? Well, we're back here again. And I love that analogy. And thank you for sharing it. I always heard the name of the company, but I never knew what it meant to pull the chute. And it's a great analogy of just taking a breath and seeing where you want to go and feel like you're in control as opposed to just hurtling to your death.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I tell people, I go, and here's the fun part. You actually get back in the plane and you do it all over again because that's the way life is.
Yep. May we all live long enough that we can see history repeat itself.
Right.
Again.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, innovation is really, the catalyst for all this stuff, right? It's just all this great innovation. It's just when people say, I can do this and I can make this work, and just, it's amazing to me. Just, I love it. I'm so thankful I live in an era like we're living in, where I've seen so much change in such a few number of years that it's just incredible.
So as we wrap up here, there's probably somebody that feels like they are in free fall right now, right? They can't breathe. They don't know where they're going. They're scared to death. What words of wisdom would you have for them right now?
Well, obviously my first reaction is pull the chute.
And so what does that mean for them?
That means that they need to take a pause. We talk about time management, and really the reality is that you don't manage time, you manage yourself in time. And so what I like to do is tell people, look, block out an hour a week, 2 hours a week, or a half hour every other day, whatever it takes, just to take a breath, to feel in control, to see where you're at and see where you want to go. Because what happens is that we wake up, our feet hit the floor, and we're in it. And so before we know it, the day's over and we didn't do anything that we were supposed to do. You have to be intentional about just taking a moment to look and seeing where you're at, to see where you want to go, and to kind of work on that business, as they say, instead of always being in it, right? Because life comes at you and it hits you hard. There was a great line from the movie Rocky Balboa when he's talking to his son, and he said, "Life hits you hard," right? And he said, "It's not how whether you get up." He says, "It's whether you get up and move forward," right? And so we have to keep that in mind, because that's what's going to happen. And so we just need to be able to just take that moment. And so my advice to people would be, schedule something on your calendar and don't change it. Like for me, every Monday and every Tuesday mornings, the first hour from 8 to 9, I go for a walk. I listen to some meditation. I just kind of start my week that way, because it sets the tone for the week, because I know it's going to be crazy after that. And so you need to do that. And I think about the business. I think about some different things that I could do, ideas that I have, things that I want to record, and then schedule those times. But try to make sure that you don't allow yourself to change it. Because what happens a lot of times is we block that out. And then someone wants to talk and we go, well, that's usually my time, but I can move that for you. You got to be very strict about that. And that's going to make a huge, huge difference for you.
Well, Jeff, thank you for all you do. If people want to get more wisdom and connect with you, what's the best place?
A couple different places. Of course, pullthechute.net. And that's the chute is, people have a tendency to want to do an S. It's a C. Think of a parachute. .net. Jeff at pullthechute.net is my email. You can find me on LinkedIn. The last name is S like in Sam, ESOL. I will be the only Sesol on the entire LinkedIn. And then the other way would be, reach out and listen to the podcast, which is pullthechute.net/podcasts. And let us know. We're always excited to have new people on the show, and we've been very blessed this year. Starting in like December of last year, we somehow got really popular to the point, and what I mean by that is a lot of people want to be on our show. So we are literally dropping 2 shows a week right now, because we have so many people that want to be on the show. And I felt bad in March if they weren't going to be on until July. And so we're currently kind of booked out through November right now, but it's just a fun time. It's a very relaxed show. My co-host Jana Landry is amazing, and her and I been doing it together for over 3 years now. We just dropped our 200th episode, and we just love doing it. We just love talking to people and digging down. So it's very relaxed. We just have a conversation. But reach out to us for that as well.
Well, thanks for having those conversations and letting the world listen in.
Thanks so much.
What a ride, right? Jeff reminds us that innovation is incredible, but without intention, it can sometimes feel overwhelming. And if you're feeling like you're in free fall right now, trying to keep up, trying to figure it out, maybe it's time to take his advice. Pull the chute. Take a pause. Breathe. Look at where you are and where you want to go. That's not weakness. That's called wisdom and leadership. Jeff also dropped some serious wisdom about podcasting in this age of AI. He's using tools like AI to catalog his interviews, deliver deeper value to his listeners, and make his content work harder for him. But at the core, it's still about human connection. Real people sharing real stories to help others realize that they're not alone. So whether you're leading a team, running a business, or showing up on a podcast, this episode, it's a reminder that success today is less about doing more and more about thinking deeper. Want to connect with Jeff? Visit pullthechute.net. And yes, that's shoot with a C, like parachute. Or tune into its podcast, Pull the Chute, to hear more of these down-to-earth, actionable conversations. Until next time, stay strong. The world needs to hear you now more than ever.